to record. Fantastic. Okay, so it's my great pleasure to welcome people from one of the projects that I work on today. So I won't say anything about the project because I've asked them to introduce it, but I'd like to introduce Dhara Malavia, who works in the MRC Centre for Mycology and is a postdoctoral research assistant, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Ray Chan from the School of Geography in Exeter, and Dhara is from Exeter as well. And he's also currently a postdoctoral research assistant, but soon to become a postdoctoral researcher or senior researcher on his own project, which is funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is looking at antimicrobial resistance in China. So that's really excited. And finally, I would like to welcome Dr. Susan Conlon, who is from University of Bristol and is a postdoctoral research assistant in human geography, but belongs to the Human Vet School. So just to get right into the interview, could you describe kind of briefly what our project is about? And I don't know how best to do this, either raise hand or just start talking and interrupt one another. It's completely fine, you know, it's super informal, so whatever you feel is best.
Susan, are you going to go or should I go?
I feel like because the idea came from you, Dhara, like the original, so and flourished from there. So perhaps.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk about what the project aim is, and if anyone has any additional inputs, they can please join in. So for me, this project looks at understanding the environmental and socioeconomic impacts of use and pollution of agricultural azoles in water bodies. And because we're based in Devon, or broadly south of England, we want to start looking at water bodies within southwest of England. So that's what my perspective is on the project.
Fantastic. Does anyone have anything to add on that? Or?
Not unless you want us to go into more detail on our specific contributions.
You can if you want. It's up to you, really. It's do you feel that there's something which wasn't covered in that, or?
I guess just to emphasize the interdisciplinary nature of the work. It's what has made, I think, our work appealing to our funder, the Cabot Institute for the Environment. We've brought together a range of disciplines that I think make it an interesting kind of holistic look at fungicide use in the Southwest. So drawn from microbiology and human geography, as well as your work, Andy, and Amy Murray, who we didn't mention, but who's looking at risk assessments, right, in relation to AMR.
Yes, yeah. So Amy Murray did the risk assessments for our project, but she's currently on medical leave, so she couldn't join us today. And we also had Nervo, which is someone from Cardiff University who has been involved in this project to some degree, but has kind of been less involved in the last couple of months. So it's worth saying that we met at GW4, and that was an opportunity given to us where a range of researchers from different disciplines came together to focus on the topic of AMR. So the way in which we engaged in this particular interdisciplinary research was one which was facilitated by a training opportunity, really. But I'd be interested to know if any of you have worked on interdisciplinary projects in the past, and whether this helped to prepare you for working on interdisciplinary research in our project in any way.
I also want to add one more point is we also work with key stakeholders in a long academic setting, like Groundswell, like arable farmers in Devon or in southwest of England. We also work with, collaborate with Southwest Water, and also we try to create some workshops and meeting to engage with wider audience to promote and even to exchange our idea about how can we improve our project outcome. So those are the academic activity we have involved. Back to your question, Andy, I think before I joining this research team, I have experience to work with a range of animal health related stakeholders and researchers like veterinary surgeons, microbiologists, epidemiologists. These are those experience help me to bring different research angle to look at animal health or farming activities. We also bring our idea, how can we improve or even provide some knowledge on how can we co-produce knowledge with farmers in order to improve their farming situations. So these are those interdisciplinary knowledge very crucial for me to develop before joining the research team.
Fantastic.
I have a similar sort of experience in terms of interdisciplinary work. I've worked with chemists, with pharmacists, and also with physicists, along with other biologists. But I've always worked within the scientific community rather than, reaching out to stakeholders. We do have some collaboration with patient groups, but that's again very medical oriented. And I suppose because my project or most of my projects, they look at understanding how fungi behave and how they interact with humans in terms of infections, and in the environment how they interact with other natural components of the environment. That's what was driving force for my work. And because my study has a large focus on drug resistance, I started looking at how drug resistance affects fungi and how it leads to interactions with human hosts. And that led me to think that, okay, these are the different ways it behaves when it is resistant to drugs. Then what happens? What causes it to become resistant? What are the ways it acquires this resistance? So that's how I started thinking about the different possibilities, and that's what led me to the project that we're working on right now. That azoles are fungicides that are used in farms, but they're also antibiotics used on humans, and a constant exposure to these through different, in different ways, like through soil in farm, through water, and these constant exposures of azole that is polluting these different environmental places will lead to resistance in fungi, and that's how we came up with the project, really.
Fantastic.
I suppose from my perspective, previous work has involved working with hydrologists and climate scientists. So my work in my PhD, I looked at how people in high mountain regions were using and managing their water, driven by an interest in how they were dealing with climate change policies and climate adaptation policies that were affecting their everyday use. So that meant that I talked quite a bit to both the communities themselves. Most of my work has probably focused on the agricultural community and kind of marginalized communities before this project, I guess. And I guess it's enabled me to see links, I think, sometimes, and help formulate research questions that maybe make links across disciplines. And my current work, is with I'm working more closely with veterinarians, both in the UK and in Argentina, and that's again another layer, like probably closer to Ray's work, that includes an interest in animal behavior and welfare as well, which adds another dimension and kind of brings us to food. And it's it becomes very broad, right? But it helps to see the system issues, I think, when you start to get that kind of exposure.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that interdisciplinary research does, isn't it? Is that you realize that the context of the problem is constantly like broadening and expanding, that it relates to so many things. But I think that from all your answers, you get this sense that stakeholders it doesn't necessarily mean someone external to the universities, or it could be someone who your research is being done for instance, in terms of like communities, or it could be other organizations, so like working with pharmaceutical companies. It's someone who is invested in your research in a way that they're part of the research, but at the same time they perform a kind of academic function as well as a kind of broader function, I suppose, in a way. And then the stakeholders that we've been working with on this project have been much more outward facing. They've been people who kind of didn't know about our research, and we contacted them because we saw some relevance for what they're doing. So it was about questions about how to get them involved and when to get them involved. It might be worth just outlining who the stakeholders we contacted are, in a sense, or who we think they are. So if anyone wants to get the ball rolling on that, and I might just chip in if any are missing, in a sense, because that's more my side of the research. But
I know we reached out to, I'm most familiar with Innovation for Agriculture because they helped provide contacts with local farmers who we were able to start interviewing. Then there's Wessex Water, who also helped us with identifying key rivers where we could take samples from. They're the two that spring to mind.
Sure. So I'm probably in a better position to kind of broaden this out, because I arranged a stakeholder network meeting earlier this week. So we had someone called, his name was Yog, and he was from the Water Rivers Trust earlier, and we met him. I'd say he's interested in our research, but he's not kind of committed to the same extent that Wessex Water and Innovation for Agriculture are, in the sense that they've explicitly agreed to kind of support and guide our research going forward. We also have made our research, or are in the process of making our research, into secondary school materials with science communicators. So Future and Careers have become quite an important kind of stakeholder, and they attended that session and were quite positive about it. We also had the farmers themselves. I think they're very interested in the research, and we definitely want to build on that going forward, is making them more central to our research. I think they're the main ones that spring to my mind. We're looking to develop the project in some way which relates to food studies as well, but we haven't got those stakeholders secured yet. But that's a sense in which it's, like Susan mentioned, it's one of the broader issues that our research could address.
I would also like to mention Mark, who is an agronomist.
Yes.
And he has offered to help us with establishing protocols for looking at risk assessments. So
absolutely,
that would be very nice.
Yeah. It's Mark Dews, isn't it? He's an agronomist who works for Agri. So there's that organization, which is a national agronomical organization, which would be fantastic for us going forward. And maybe we'll talk a bit more about the relationship between farmers and agronomists in a bit, if it comes up. But yeah, so my next question is, have you experienced any difficulties from working like within with interdisciplinary people, or from different settings, or with stakeholders? Is there anything which has been particularly difficult in this research or in previous research that you would like to raise?
Well, normally I think that interdisciplinary research is the way to go forward these days, because every question or every project that has an objective is not linear, it's multidimensional, it has many different aspects to it, and expertise from each area pertaining to the project is very important. So interdisciplinary work is the best way to approach any project or any project aim. In terms of difficulties, I wouldn't really call them difficulties. I would say there can be challenges getting your message across, because everyone's coming from a different perspective. So bringing it all together and moving forward can be a bit of challenge, but again, I would say it's completely worth it.
Yeah, I would agree. I would add to that, to what Dhara says. It takes time, doesn't it, to kind of there's challenges of communication, and I think it's important to kind of recognize the time that it takes to kind of build relationships, and kind of to feel comfortable about sharing, and also making a contribution where you can. There has to be some kind of security and safety in the group, I think. And I think we've created that really well by, informal chats as well, being kind of available to each other. I think have been really important, and just being openness and honest about where we are, with other work, I think has been crucial to the interdisciplinarity on this team.
I think working in a interdisciplinary research team, communication is one of the challenge, because as Dhara said or Susan mentioned, we come from different knowledge background, so we need to speak in common language. So maybe jargon-free, try to avoid scientific terminology, and make the conversation more accessible to different stakeholders. Secondly, different stakeholders we invited into this group maybe come from different interest parties. So to avoid them like conflict of interest, or sometimes when they debate around some sensitive issues, we try to avoid that scenario happened. The way we try to do it is try to open up the question instead of like try to arguing this person may be not good for this activity. So try to not to blame. Instead, we just try to open up the issue for discussion. Maybe these are the way that we can tackle the conflict of interest problem. Thirdly, I think trust and respect are very important. It takes time, as Susan said, maybe more informal meetings, let one another know each other more, and also try to set up more activity, maybe ice breaking or some trust building activity in the stakeholder group, so that we can be more confident to speak from our perspective.
Great, yeah, and I think it's really interesting that that idea of friendship is emerging. So the idea that you have to be friends as well as colleagues and researchers, that's maybe something specific to interdisciplinary research in a way that it's not in the other kinds of research that you do. You can work with people who are on the same kind of researching the same topics as you, and you don't necessarily have to have that level of support as we've established, which has made this project so strong in a sense. That it's something that we haven't been, something we've been doing on top of what we're paid to do. So it's been something that we kind of volunteer to do because we are interested in the issue and interested in it coming from a variety of perspectives. But it's also something that we've enjoyed doing because we enjoy working together and building those friendships and those support networks. I think it's also worth noting that, we talk about how important it is to have like informal chats and be open to one another. But for most of our time knowing each other, we've been under COVID restrictions. So we haven't actually seen each other face to face very much. Because Susan's in Bristol and the rest of us are in Exeter, and we couldn't do any field work for the majority of last year. So a lot of our contact has been online support rather than kind of in-person support. I think one of the things that maybe come up from what Dhara was saying is that you don't always know where interdisciplinary research is going, and on the one side that's a benefit to be open to the direction of the collaboration and the synergy, but it must also be sometimes it's a bit worrying, isn't it, when you don't really know what the output of your research is going to be, and it's led so much by the stakeholders.
Yeah, I sort of agree with you, Andy, on that. But then that's what project aims are for. They keep you grounded when you have all these different ideas, and they all might seem very attractive, and you might think, oh yeah, this is definitely something we missed, but we should look at it, we should investigate this further. And it might seem the right thing to do, but at the same time you have to go back to your project aim and realize that, okay, this is where we want to go eventually, so we want to move in that direction, and we need to decide what questions we need to answer, what things we need to focus on at the minute in order to get there. So it's partly directional, but partly also not rigid. It gives you the freedom to at least consider the other ideas and perspectives.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that well, that leads us on to the next question, really, about the benefits specific to our project. So speaking about the benefits of interdisciplinary research, but then in terms of the two sides of our project, so we have, generally speaking, well, I'd say maybe there's three aspects to our project, but we have the social science side where we've been interviewing farmers and conducting ethnographic research. We have the biological science aspect, which has been doing HPLC analysis on water samples from rivers. And then I would probably say that my stakeholder side sits somewhere in between that as well. So kind of engaging with people and trying to get our research known and getting the right people involved in conversations. But I'd be really interested to know what people think the specific benefits have been from the collaborations of those sides of the project. I mean, it even feels a bit artificial to separate them in that way, because I think that, in some ways that there's a big social science element to our quantitative research. I think that, it's really interesting going out and experiencing what it's like to collect samples and go to the lab. And that's not always an opportunity we have, but I'd be interested to know what you think.
I think from a social science perspective, I find it very eye-opening. I think I can see science in action in laboratory. So I follow Dhara and enter the laboratory. I remember I enter 3 doors, which is different level of biosecurity. And she told me, I need to wash my hand or wear a glove better, because I might get some material that may be kind of a very low level of threat, but still there is some biosecurity risk. That moment, I try to understand how she run the HPLC test in the laboratory and how she think about the test result. So as a social scientist, I think Susan also may be interested how does she create that type of knowledge in a laboratory. So this type of scientific knowledge I find very fascinating, and I don't have that type of knowledge. So her knowledge can enrich my social science knowledge to understand how science knowledge is produced in different settings.
Yeah, I remember telling you, don't touch anything without gloves. Yeah, that's it's because it's a security level 2 and they're potential pathogens. So it can cause infection, but it doesn't always do so. And you're right, it's very similar for me as well. Being a microbiologist, I'm quite used to working in labs. So for me, the social science aspect of things is very fascinating, to the extent that I feel like our project is interdependent, and it cannot be complete on its own. If you look at just the science bit of it, and if you just look at the social science bit of it, independently, they don't make sense together. They don't make sense independently, but when you put them together, they work well, they complete the project. So in my opinion, it wouldn't exist without each other.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that's a really, really nice point. And I'm jealous that you got to visit Dhara in the lab. I was really hoping to have that opportunity with this project, but I suppose with COVID it made it more difficult. But maybe in the future I could join. I'd really love
to. Absolutely.
And well, we also got to go to Groundswell, didn't we? Which is a farming festival, which was really interesting. I mean, I think it's opened up a lot of doors because we have the two sides of our project in a sense. It's not. I think that coming into this project, the quantitative scientists in the past maybe hadn't had the best experiences communicating with stakeholders, and it was interesting from a social science perspective to see why that might be the case. There's something missing in the communication between science and stakeholders, which was made much more accessible through our social science work, maybe because we value the time which we spend with people in different ways, for instance. So I think that from a quantitative science perspective, going to Groundswell for 3 days may have been seen as time away from the lab, not doing your research, whereas from a social science perspective, that was the lab in a sense for social scientists. So it's interesting that they can kind of fill those gaps with one another. But I don't know what your experience was like of Susan.
Well, that's a really nice point as well. I mean, that experience at Groundswell was invaluable to understand, for me, more kind of contextual, understand the wider context of our research, and the policy side of things. So understanding the, farmers' views and responses to our interview questions with those in mind, makes it easier to not easier, but you can interpret them differently, right? With a more holistic view of the context. So Groundswell helped to develop, or really start developing an understanding of that, of kind of particularly regenerative agriculture, that the trends in agroecology locally, and how I think that's starting to kind of infiltrate how farmers, the decisions they make, and the drivers of fungicide use, for example.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, fantastic. No, it does, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so I'd like to know kind of what was most surprising about our research to each of you. So did you find anything particularly surprising? And do you think this was in any way related to our interdisciplinary work, or yeah, I'll stop there anyway.
Well, I think that just the depth of the project was surprising. I didn't think that it would need as much commitment, especially in terms of getting in touch with the farming community, the network that they have, and the trust they have with each other. I mean, that was very surprising to me. I didn't think it would be a community. I thought it would rather just be, individual farmers looking out for themselves and, managing their own farms, really.
Yeah, I guess for me, the surprise, what continues to surprise me, is the number of organizations involved in various capacities, and from so many different perspectives, including soil, for example. And that's been a really opened my eyes in terms of what could be done in this project. The other thing I think was seeing links again, kind of around the agroecology movement, which is a global movement that started in South America, but just to see how it's coming through in how regenerative agriculture is defined locally. To see how that's materializing in this region is really interesting, because it comes about differently in every place. So it's kind of that helps make kind of wider links again to a kind of global context of agriculture.
I think just what Dhara and Susan said, we assembling those knowledge from different stakeholders. I find very fascinating, because we come from different angle, but this platform create a dialogue for everyone to know about each other, and also share how can we make improvement together. It's not just the farmer themselves, but also researchers, HDB or government related government bodies, or even water company. They also found a stake, and they found a role that they can involve and make some contributive effort for the water use, or even the use of ASO. I think it's very fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that one example which demonstrates that level of connectedness between all these different organizations was that in our workshop earlier this week, we had someone there who was asking about who was responsible for the waterways, right? And it took a long time for us as a group, and a group of people who with a lot of knowledge in this area, to actually come to a definitive answer about who was responsible for what. Kind of generally it was that the environmental agency has kind of overall responsibility, but then it feeds down to a lot of different organizations which have partial responsibility in particular cases. So there was this sense that even within the specialist knowledge that our stakeholders have, it's still not clear cut. Yes, some of these things are just fuzzy at best. Yeah. So and I think go on, Dhara.
No, I was just saying that I completely agree with you, and that is one of the most fascinating things about addressing the research aims and finding the solution, is because there's so many people involved, so many stakeholders involved, that who exactly is going to take the lead on driving a change,
Mm.
So that is one of the most fascinating things that I didn't really anticipate. For me, when we started the project, it was like, yes, we have this question. We want to understand that whether agricultural azoles in water are a danger or a threat or a risk to environment as a whole. And it seems very simple when you look at the question, but when you consider the organizations and the people that are involved with this question, it becomes that much difficult to identify a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'd add to what you said is that the things which surprised me was the difference, because Ray's got a background in livestock farming. It was the difference between arable farming and livestock farming which really blew me away, because arable farmers have this close connection with their agronomists, which is under researched in academia, even though it has quite a lot of expert knowledge within agronomical science or something like that. Agronomists themselves are really concerned about their relationship and as farmers, because it's central to the running of their farms. But that was just completely not on my radar when I started this research, and I think it's really interesting to see how arable farming has different kind of practices as well. So for instance, there's green farming and arable farming, so farming which is not meant for food but meant for green production of energies through anaerobic digesters. And I hadn't even thought about that as a possibility in farming. So it's been amazing to just get an insight into those differences, even though on paper I think we were the best group to deal with this question. There were still gaps missing within our own knowledge, I think, which was super interesting to uncover.
Mm.
Yes. Okay. So I'll ask. Did you have a follow-up?
I was just going to add that I think something really interesting as well that came out of the workshop the other day was to try and identify the parallels that we can, if there's some synergies between livestock and arable, or trying to bring together rather than see them as separate. I think we need to bring them together more, because there's a lot of lessons that have been learnt by the research on AMR in livestock farming, right? That could be considered or should be considered to some extent and by arable farmers, or how those overlap or can work side by side. Yeah.
Absolutely. And with the kind of growing interest in regenerative agriculture, the difference between livestock farming and arable farming is becoming less. A lot of farmers say that they view their livestock as part of their crop rotation, as if it were no longer an animal, but actually something you're essentially planting on the soil. Yes.
Exactly.
Which is really interesting. Yeah. So that kind of animal non-animal distinction is breaking down in some farmers' minds, at least. So I'm going to ask one more question. I did have a question about if we were to do it again, what would you change? But I think that the next question, given our time constraints, probably says the same thing, but with a much more kind of positive outlook. So it's, has this project changed the way that you would engage with publics and stakeholders or people from different disciplines in your future research? Do you feel more confident to do it, or do you think it's something that you'd avoid?
Oh, I think it's absolutely essential after, experiences from this project. I feel like we need to have relevant stakeholders involved in projects. It's very important to get that outlook from an external body to understand, what exactly the problem is, or what exactly needs to be addressed. So yes, I would definitely try and involve more stakeholders, external stakeholders, in my future projects.
As I'm a soil scientist, also maybe similar to Susan, I'm not, she's doing a research in Argentina and I'm doing research in the UK. I'm not born in this country. So there are lots of cultural differences in terms of understanding farming. So from this project, because arable farming is not my strength, so I take more time to listen and try to understand how they use their tone, the stakeholder, and how do they set the agenda when they talk about ASO. I find this is really fascinating to me, and I also learn a lot. So for me, kind of personal growth in the sense that if I deal with some project which is not, I'm not familiarized with, particularly in cultural context, the first step I would try to listen and understand first, and then try to make some contributive question from my cultural angles. So this is also can be a contribution from, seeing from different sides. The second thing is I find very happy that I can work well with microbiologists, other soil scientists in the research team, and also philosopher in the research team. I think respect each one another and try to be honest to one another. Also, an important element that we earn the trust and friendship.
I would, I suppose, say that Ray's contributions, for example, those cultural contributions have been so useful and beneficial, and I think it's a really interesting kind of way in to see for example, the parallels with livestock. They've been invaluable, I think, and from my perspective, I've definitely more confidence to maybe pursue research locally. I've been really interested in getting more involved in or trying to understand the local context a lot more, and this certainly helps. And it kind of makes me think about when we first met, and the kind of learning we did around what makes good collaboration. And I think what has held true for this group is that we've kind of, in a way, followed those principles, maybe consciously or not, but I think that was an invaluable workshop that we did, and it gave me the confidence as well, like what Ray said, to go into an area I really didn't know anything about, and to just be like, okay, let it unfold and let's see where it goes.
Yeah. That's brilliant. They're such positive comments, and I think that sense of the foundations on which our kind of friendships were built is super important. So if you're engaging in this kind of research, there may be a question about when you invest the most time to build those connections. And even though we didn't know it at the time, the opportunity to meet with one another for a couple of days at a time for 2 of those sessions in different locations, and not do anything else apart from talk about our research in AMR, and have social activities as well, and icebreaker activities, set us up in a way to become better researchers in an interdisciplinary sense, for this project. So fantastic. Okay, well, I'm aware that we have limited time, so thank you so much for this interview today. It's been so eye-opening and given a new perspective to me on the research that we've done at this point of reflection. So we've just finished our initial work, and we're looking for further funding and currently writing funding opportunities for that. So it's great to just take stock of what we've done at this point and where it's going. So thank you to Dhara, to Ray, and to Susan. It's been great. So
Thank you, Andy.
You're very welcome.